And with that, I just want to welcome everyone to our Alumni Relations webinar. My name is Paul Carantona. I'm an Assistant Director with UNH Alumni Relations. We appreciate you joining this webinar, Putting the Ball Back in Play, the Return of Sports During COVID. This webinar is part of our Alumni Relations series. We have more webinars scheduled throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. We hope you'll join us for a future program. For those who would like to view the webinar again or share with others, we are recording this session. All Alumni Relations webinars are recorded and can be viewed on our website. Our host today is Professor Michael McCann. Mike is the founding director of the UNH Law Sports and Entertainment Law Institute. He is a leading expert in sports law and an award-winning journalist. Earlier this month, Mike left Sports Illustrated to join Sportico as a writer and legal analyst. Sportico is the newest addition to Penske Media Corporation publications, such as Rolling Stone and Variety. Over the course of his career, he has broken several national news stories and covered numerous more. We are thrilled he is able to join us this afternoon. Questions are encouraged and will be taken throughout the webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the Zoom Q&A feature. Thank you all again for joining us. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Mike.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Phoebe, who's been a big part of putting this together as well. Really just outstanding work by the entire alumni team. And thank you all for joining our conversation today. And this is truly a conversation. It's not going to be me lecturing for 45 minutes or anything like that. I want this to be more fluid, and I want to make sure that there are opportunities to ask questions, to raise points while the presentation is going on. So please feel free, as Paul mentioned, to use the chat feature to offer questions, offer thoughts, and we'll discuss them. And this is, of course, a topic that is an emerging one. It isn't as if this is a presentation on some longstanding area of law and sports. This is new. This changes by the day. And it's also one where, depending upon what state you're in, there are very different rules for sports. And the focus of the conversation will be on professional sports, college sports, and also amateur youth sports. And the real goal is figuring out, how do we go from where we are today to getting sports back on the field? And should we? Which, of course, is another question. Should we wait until there is a vaccine or some type of treatment to ensure that people that get this are going to be okay? It's a debatable point. But as things stand now, sports are on hiatus by and large. And that began back in March when, of course, the virus started to become a major issue in the United States. President Trump declared a national emergency, what went from something troubling to a full-blown pandemic. And sports played a big role in the story and the public perception changing. If you can remember, in the middle of March, the NBA canceled or suspended the rest of the season. And it happened after a player on the Utah Jazz came down with COVID. And suddenly what seemed like more of an abstract thing became very real for the sports leagues. And it changed public perception about the kind of threat that the virus posed, and also how it would disrupt, how it would upend everyday life. And that was true in sports, because after the NBA suspended the remainder of the 2019-20 season, the other leagues did the same thing. Likewise, college sports did so as well, and high school sports and youth sports. Everything hit the pause button. And what's interesting about that is that the rights of the athletes are very different depending upon what level of sport they're playing. And that's going to play a big role in sports coming back. So taking pro sports first, NBA players, NHL players, Major League Baseball, NFL players, they're all, of course, pro athletes. And what that means is that they have an employment contract. The employment contract contains all sorts of provisions about the conditions in which they get paid, and also when the employer doesn't have to pay them. And all of those major leagues are unionized, and they have a players association that negotiates a collective bargaining agreement with the respective league. That's a key aspect of this story, because in the NBA, in a CBA that has hundreds of pages, there is a force majeure clause in it. And the clause says, in so many words, if there's a qualified disruption to the league. And a qualified disruption can be a terrorist attack, a war, also an epidemic. If such an event happens, the league has the right to terminate the collective bargaining agreement and suspend pay to players. Now, that's a big deal, not only from the obvious stopping payment to players, but terminating the collective bargaining agreement has all sorts of repercussions because the CBA dictates the hours, wages, and working conditions for players. It would create a labor crisis. Now, to push that off for the time being, the NBA and the Players Association agreed essentially to hit the pause button. And the NBA didn't invoke that clause, provided the Players Association agreed to negotiate a return to play. And we have now seen that bear fruit in the NBA, where the league and the Players Association, although it's not quite formal and final, I should say, they have agreed, at least in principle, to returning to play in a bubble concept. The bubble is the idea that they're going to go to Disney in Orlando and play in a confined facility where they're tested every day for COVID, where the games are played without fans, and family and friends can't visit until after about a month. We'll see if it works. Yesterday I was talking to a lawyer who represents NBA players, and he said, there's no way this is going to work. The players are not going to stay inside the bubble. All it takes is one to not follow the rules, and there's a problem. Baseball is coming back as well, though we'll see. Some players have already said they're not coming back, and Major League Baseball has allowed teams to decide whether to pay players if they decide not to come back for a family reason. We'll see. In addition, the NHL intends to come back. The NFL has signaled that they intend to have a fall season. These games will be played without fans, and that's for a variety of reasons, one of which is that in some states, fans couldn't attend because states have imposed gathering restrictions that limit public gatherings to, in some cases, 25 or 50 people. Those gathering restrictions actually might prevent sports altogether because think about how many people you need to have a competitive game. Even a basketball game, you could say, well, it's 5-on-5, but there's a bench and there are coaches and there's referees. The numbers start to creep up. So it's going to be difficult in some states to have sports because of gathering restrictions. So that's part of the conversation as well. In addition, there's the issue of revenue. If games aren't being played with fans at them, that's going to be a big drop in revenue for the leagues, and it varies by the league. In the NHL, for instance, spectators at games constitute about 36% of league revenue. In the NFL, it's only about 15%, and that's because the NFL relies more predominantly on a broadcasting, very lucrative broadcasting contracts, as opposed to the NHL, which is a little bit more reliant on gate receipts. So does that mean players will make less money? Well, we'll have to see how that shakes out. But there's no question that this is a tumultuous time. I was thinking about creating a set of slides on this, but then it changed. It's like, well, who knows what the status will be when I actually do the presentation. So I'm going to talk it through rather than create slides that will be outdated by the time people who watch this on as a recording. What I say now may no longer be true. So those are some major issues in pro sports. Again, with pro sports, there's a collective bargaining relationship that's really important because the league can't unilaterally impose rules. If it does, it is subject to antitrust litigation. Antitrust law is a very powerful area of federal law that regulates pro leagues. And it regulates pro leagues because leagues consist of competing businesses, the teams. And under federal antitrust law, when competing businesses join hands to limit competition, it creates the possibility of a claim. Usually antitrust law is focused on consumers. So if two gas stations are telling each other or coordinating their prices, that's an antitrust problem. If Walmart and Best Buy are coordinating prices or deciding, one gets this part of the country, the other gets that part, that's a problem. In sports, consumers matter, but the players are part of the story too, where the labor is impacted when teams agree to terms that limit opportunities for compensation. Also, drug testing and biological disease testing has to be collectively bargained, or that presents a potential antitrust issue. So for lawyers, this has been a bonanza of work. And I tell my students, there will be a lot of legal work over the next couple years because of the pandemic. Part of the story is also waivers, liability waivers, which we'll talk about in college sports and youth sports as well. But one of the tricky issues that's come up is a waiver enforceable? So if you go to work and they say, sign this waiver that if you get the virus at work, you can't sue us, it's straightforward. But being straightforward doesn't mean it's legal. The 50 states have very different rules about the enforceability of waivers, including for children. Can parents sign waivers for kids? It depends on what state you're in. There's going to be a big legal fallout with the role of waivers. It is not clear. A lot of businesses like to think if you sign this, you can't sue us. Don't ever think that that's the case. There are all sorts of limitations to that. You know, if like you go park your car and it says we're not liable if you park here, well, that's not always true. And that could become an issue with sports. Let's go now talk about college sports for a minute. I think there's reason to be a lot more skeptical of college sports returning than pro sports. And I say that because, of course, college athletes are not employees. They are students. Whether they should be employees is a whole separate topic, but they're not under current conception of law. And they don't have a union or trade association negotiating for them. So it's up to the schools, it's up to the conferences, it's up to the NCAA to decide what are the terms of coming back. And we have already seen a number of athletes, college athletes, come back, and some of them have tested positive for COVID. They've come back for voluntary workouts, and now schools are thinking maybe this isn't going to work, because if we're having all these players test positive, how are we going to have games? And how will teams travel? It's one thing in the NBA where there's a bubble and it's a self-confined entity. Can't really do that with college football and most college sports. So what's going to happen? Well, certainly we don't know for sure, but I think there's reason to be skeptical that we're going to see college sports come back, at least in the fall. Maybe it will happen, but I think courts are going to be skeptical of liability waivers, at least with college athletes. In fact, yesterday, there was a story on CBS Sportsline where Senators Booker and Blumenthal are interested in proposing legislation that would prevent colleges from waiving away potential liability if college athletes get COVID. Also, some may say, well, what's the big deal if a college athlete gets COVID? They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They're in the age group that makes it profoundly unlikely that they're going to die. Many in that age group may not show any symptoms, or the symptoms might be mild. Well, there's a couple of concerns with that. One is that we don't know the long-term effect of the virus. There has been some medical information suggesting that it might cause lasting problems to the lungs and other organs, including those that might not exhibit very dire symptoms. But there's also the issue of they can spread it. They can spread it to their parents. They can spread it to their grandparents. And they can spread it to the public. And we've seen in some states like Florida and California and Texas, a lot of young people going out feeling like it's not a big deal, and then they're spreading it. And that has, I think, made it a lot harder for the country to get a handle of the virus and this pandemic. If you look at the rates in our country versus other countries, it's pretty disturbing. And that's going to delay economic recovery. So I mean, we can hope people play by the rules and wear a mask, but it's one thing for adults to do it. It's another for a young person who feels as if the virus isn't a real threat. So testing. The testing for the virus is itself an issue. How does testing work? Can you force someone to be tested? Well, generally, no, you can't force someone to take a medical test. But let's say a school says you must take a test to be eligible to play. And if you don't take it, you can lose your scholarship. And if you lose your scholarship, you might not be able to afford to go to college. There are real troubling issues that are surfacing. And going to youth sports, I think the same elements are in play, where with youth sports, the athletes might be okay if they get it. They're of the age group that it's not considered a concern. And certainly the mortality rate from the virus appears to be much lower than what was initially feared. Initially, it was thought to be maybe 3%. Well, it looks like it's more like less than 0.5%. But that doesn't mean it's okay. I think we have to pivot from just because the mortality rate isn't high, that doesn't mean it's not awful for some people who get it. And again, we don't know the long-term effects. It's a new virus. So those are some issues to think about. Another issue that has come up, and this is certainly going to be an issue with youth sports, is insurance. Businesses shutting down. Can they collect what is called business interruption or BI insurance? Business interruption insurance is much bigger than sports, but it's related to sports because there are businesses that, of course, if they can't serve customers, they're going to go out of business. The government has provided subsidies to the business to help them pay payroll, but will those subsidies continue? It remains to be seen. Can they collect from their insurer? Usually businesses have policies which say if there's a fire, if there's a flood, you can collect. What about a pandemic? Well, we'll see. The policies vary. And I have a story coming out on this topic later in the week about insurance. It is very tricky. And companies that didn't get the right insurance prior to the pandemic coming could be losing a lot of money, or they're going to have to go to court to litigate, to show that their policy should cover pandemic. Others had more foresight. The NCAA, for instance, in Wimbledon, they both purchased policies that included language for disease pandemic. So Wimbledon was able to collect. The NCAA was able to collect from March Madness. Other leagues didn't do that. And like with insurance, you're buying something hoping it doesn't happen, but the more things you get, the more insulation you have if something does occur. I think when we're talking about these topics, it's worth noting that they connect to other issues. So when we talk about college sports and whether or not athletes should come back, concurrent to that is the issue of name, image, and likeness, where Congress is looking into whether or not college athletes should be able to negotiate the use of their name, image, and likeness, as will be the case in California, Florida, Colorado, probably other states soon, should Congress pass a federal law that allows college athletes to hire agents and sign endorsement deals. The reason why I mention that in this context is because if Congress explores legislation for college athletes in return to play with respect to COVID, it's very possible that the legislation could delve into other topics, including name, image, and likeness. So though I wanted to sketch out, and I don't want to talk forever, I want to make sure that there are opportunities. I think I saw, I'm going to hit the Q&A now.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions waiting in there for you, Mike, when you're ready for them.
Sure. So let me look at them. John Gump, I coach at a public university in Pennsylvania. I expect some screening is going to end up my responsibility. The administration is saying I will be protected from liability. I have concern. You should have concern. And, I think this is a situation where the area of law is novel and there are not certain answers with this. And it's a situation where you might want to get legal counsel, someone who's admitted to practice in that state who can give you some more assurance. That's not to say the administration that you have at your school is not telling the truth, but they may not know. They may feel more certain about it than they ought to be. And I think with situations like that, getting a lawyer, and I know people don't like to get lawyers, I realize that, but lawyers can help and they can give you some certainty. And you always want to get a lawyer who's admitted to practice law in the state that you're in, just to make sure that what you're being told by an administrator is in fact true. Because you don't want later on the school or organization to be wrong, and then you're named in a complaint. It's always worth getting someone who knows the law in that state. And again, with waivers, every state is different. There is no uniform rule. It isn't like with some topics where you can say, yeah, that's the legal rule. It is all over the board. And I encourage people to get local counsel. It doesn't always cost a fortune either, just for sort of certainty of mind. Anonymous attendee, What are your thoughts on youth sports, particularly baseball, starting up again in the New England area? From what I've seen, keeping kids, players, and spectators at social distance is nearly impossible. It does appear hard. Kids are not as good about social distancing as others, and some are, but I think that it's pretty clear that with baseball, with the dugout, how will social distancing work? And it's really impossible on some level with baseball, right? Because if you're running to first base, you're going to come into close contact with the first baseman. If you're sliding, there's a double play and you want to try to break up the double play. How do you not get into close proximity? And this is where I think the waiver comes in, where sports organizations, youth sports, are going to try to use waivers as a way of mitigating the risk. And some may say we have to accept risk. There's all sorts of risk with sports. There's risks of catastrophic injury. If you go to a baseball game, you can get hit by a foul ball and get killed. I mean, this is a risk that courts have said we assume. Perhaps we should feel similarly about the risk of COVID. I think the difference with COVID is when we assume the risk, those around us might not be assuming it, right? We could spread that risk to people that didn't say it was okay for us to do it. And that, to me, is the distinguishing characteristic. But I do think we're going to see sports organizations try to come back. I think the big test will be, let's see how the pro leagues do. Because if the pro leagues can't pull it off, I'm skeptical that college and youth sports will be able to. The pro leagues that will have a bubble, right? I mean, they're going to have more resources than anyone else. If it works for them, maybe it'll work. But I think there's reason to be cautious and somewhat skeptical. I think we all hope it works. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan. In addition to being a sports lawyer, I'm a big fan. And I want to see sports come back. It's in my interest. It's frustrating to, I'm not one of these people that wants to watch Netflix all day. I want to watch live sports, but it has to be done in a way that's certainly safe, especially for youth sports, where they're not employees, they're kids, they don't really know risk. And in some cases, parents can't sign waivers on behalf of kids either. Let's take the next question. Drew Weller. Drew, I'm a president of my son's travel youth hockey club. How should we think about the startup of the new season related to waivers, insurance? We're following guidance and local U.S. hockey local affiliate governing body. Certainly, Drew, I think it makes sense to hear the experts, to follow what the guidance is. But I would also, again, go back to my earlier comments to say, think about retaining an expert. Think about getting an attorney that knows, for instance, insurance law, and having him or her be admitted to practice law wherever you're located. That's a key thing. You got to hire a lawyer who's local, who's admitted to practice law in the state that's relevant, and have somebody who's up to date on waivers in that jurisdiction. And be cautious, because you're going to see news stories come out that sort of give these overarching takes on waivers and insurance. This is a state by state, in some cases, local issue, that I wouldn't rely on national publications on this topic. It is very much local, and getting legal advice is money well spent, I would say. Let's see what else is here. Is this a new one? Is this Dave Shea? Am I seeing that? David Shea, to the extent fans will be in attendance, will the various leagues indemnify the players? Yeah, good question. So the NBA, for instance, it was reported, has purchased an insurance policy to offset the risk of players. I don't know about the other leagues. I don't think we know that yet. The Players Association of the NBA demanded, and the NBA, to its credit, decided that it would purchase additional insurance for players. But with insurance, it often doesn't cover everything. I mean, that's something to think about with policies, where you might have insurance, but if you're a pro athlete, what does it cover? Let's say you get COVID and it hurts your lungs in a way that makes it impossible to come back, or takes a while to come back. What will the insurance policy say? Will it cover the amount of money you would have earned, or will it only cover a fraction of it? I think everyone's going to go in and be as reasonable and pragmatic as possible, but I definitely think insurance is going to be an issue. Let's hope none of the athletes get it in a way that causes lasting harm, but we just don't know this virus well enough to know if that's not going to happen. Let's see, Paul. Hey, Paul. I know Paul. Paul, at the college level, do the conferences have to make decisions as a group, or could there be some schools that play and others? Yeah, great question. So I think colleges would be smart to initially make decisions on their own. And I say that because every school has its own insurance policy. Every school is subject to different state laws. And if they decide they're going to go along with the conference, their general counsel should take a close look at that, because what the conference decides is okay may not be correct for an individual school and the set of laws that govern that school. Also, the sort of tolerance of risk might be different between universities. Some universities might be more eager to resume sports. I mean, let's face it, schools in the Southeast Conference have a real incentive to get football back, and they will be under pressure to resume sports. Schools in other parts of the country where college sports may not generate the same level of revenue, in New England, may not have the same set of incentives. They may look at this with a more skeptical eye. But I think the question raises the issue of be careful if you're an individual school, because relying on what the NCAA says in this context may pose some risk, because again, the state-by-state issue that I mentioned earlier is so important. There's also the antitrust problem, where when schools get together to and agree on policies, it creates the possibility of an antitrust issue, because schools are competing businesses. They compete for athletes, they compete for faculty, they compete for staff, they compete for grants from the government. That creates another layer of concern. So I would be cautious if I'm a school. Anonymous attendee, a different topic that we're dealing with is national Black Lives Matter movement addressing racial inequity. I think it's awesome that it was reported that the NBA is planning to allow players to replace names on their jersey. What are your thoughts on the impact this will have on the NBA players and for the NBA game and the players? I agree. I think the NBA often is ahead of the curve. And this, to me, is a very sensible move to allow players to express themselves. This is a transformative time in our country. We have the virus, we have social unrest, and I think historians will look back to see how institutions behaved. Were they ahead of the curve, or were they trying to hold on to a regime that may no longer be in place? And the NBA, as the question noted, is trying to be mindful of that, is trying to allow players to express their views about issues of race and inequality. And I think colleges should maybe hear the same, that it's important to allow athletes to speak up and express their views, because the reality is if they don't, they're going to do it anyway. And it makes sense for any sports organization, I think, to be accepting that times are changing and that there's a generation of people that are looking at issues differently from my generation. I'm in my mid-40s. I grew up in a very different time period. And I think for younger folks, they're looking at issues differently, and they are the future. And I think with respect to the NBA, it was a pretty smart move in my view. That's my view. Will leagues, and let me make sure I'm not missing any questions here, so I'm going to try to read these off quickly. Jennifer Adams, if I missed your question, please just ask it again. Jennifer Adams, with the inability to play live games, do you think this will have a major effect on those kids that are nearing the age where they want to get looked at by colleges for sports scholarships? Absolutely. And they will be in some ways victims, where there are going to be young athletes that are not playing. And for some, not playing means not getting seen by college coaches who are doing recruiting. For some, it means the recruiting isn't taking place at all. Now, we live in a world, we're on Zoom now, right? Where Zoom might be able to help a little bit, where people can do workouts and show their footage through recordings. But in terms of live game action, which of course coaches want to see, until sports comes back, it's going to be hard. So I definitely, Jennifer's question is a really good one. And I think there will be some athletes that will not be seen. Now, what does that mean? It means they need to be more proactive. Maybe they should go out and do videos of them running the 40, of them scrimmaging, where they can show those videos to coaches and hope that that is evidence, if you will, that they deserve a scholarship. Let's see here. Anonymous athlete, have you heard anything about UNH athletics happening this fall? I have not. I know that the school is looking at the issues as prudently as possible, and that's true of every school. I mean, that's not unique to our school. I think we'll have to wait and see, and let's see how the virus is. I think there was some optimism. I mean, I felt more optimistic a few weeks ago, and now we're seeing the rates sort of take off again. That has to be factoring into the thinking of all sports organizers, all universities. Let's see, Matthew Winterthroth, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize. Will leagues that resume sports with the public in stadiums be able to limit liability? Yeah, be contractual language on the back of the ticket. So this is what they do with foul ball injuries, with other injuries. I'm skeptical though, because with say a foul ball injury, it says on the back of the ticket, you accept the risk. If you sue, it's going to get dismissed. First off, those are risks related to the sport itself. With COVID, it's really not about the sport. It's just disease, right? So I'm not sure if those are going to work. And again, let's see, it's a 50 state issue where there are different laws in place. So we'll wait and see. I think it's a much more complicated topic than traditional sports risks if fans go to games. This is a very different type of risk than we've seen before. Paul, how do colleges and universities get the level of advice and legal assurance that they can play with risk mitigation strategies? Will their plans require court pre-approval? It's going to be hard to get court pre-approval. A lot of courts don't want to take on an issue until it's ripe. And the issue there is that it's not yet ripe because there's no legal controversy. That said, they could seek a guidance from their state attorney general's office to at least review the matter. Some state attorney general's office are willing to provide advisory opinions that could be helpful to colleges and other sports organizations. But often, at least with courts, there has to be a live controversy. Anonymous attendee, kids are so starved for something to do that we've allowed our son to do some summer activities. They're doing their best to keep them socially distanced. People are very divided online. Do you feel there's any consensus on youth sports that kids can stay a bit apart? I don't think there's a consensus. I think we're all figuring it out. And you're hitting at the issue of kids want to go outside and play. We were all kids, right? I mean, to be stuck at home as a kid in particular is very hard. And I think there are probably pragmatic ways of dealing with this, where having youth activities that maintain some level of social distance. You know, we can't stay sort of, I think, hidden in our house for the foreseeable future. We have to have some type of activity. It's important for kids to be around other kids in ways that are hopefully safe. Maybe use of a mask could help. But these are tricky issues. And I always think at the end of the day, there are reasonable ways of addressing them. But at the same time, I don't think we've yet know what those reasonable ways are. Let's see what else. How are we feeling about Cam Newton? Here we go. So how are we feeling? So I very different topic. I'll answer it because I know people are very interested in Cam Newton signing with the Patriots. I mean, I think for the New England Patriots, it's a tremendous move. Let's face it, Jarrett Stidham is an unknown. Maybe he's great, maybe he's not. He's thrown, 4 passes? It's hard to rely on that kind of evidence. Cam Newton was a league MVP a few years ago. If he's healthy, he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. The Patriots have signed him to an incentive-laden deal. He has now an incentive to play well because he might be able to secure a huge contract. It's a pretty brilliant move by the Patriots. And if it doesn't work out, they have a young quarterback to try out. So let's face it, the Patriots have repositioned themselves this season, where if Cam Newton is healthy, I would think they are favorites in the AFC East, and they could win the AFC. Cam Newton, it wasn't too long ago, one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. And he's 31 years old, but 31 for a quarterback isn't the same as 31 for a wide receiver or a running back. Look at Tom Brady. Look how great he has played over the last 10 years, all throughout his 30s and into his early 40s. So yeah, I think it's a great move. I don't see any downside, honestly. The only downside you might say is that it could postpone the development of Jarrett Stidham, but I don't know if that in the grand scheme of things is such a major concern, but we'll see. John Gump, or let me go to, Mary Beth Marino. Youth club programs appear to be moving back to fuller participation quicker than town organizations. It feels as though they're assuming more risks because they need to generate revenue and keep their clubs operating. Is this risky? Yeah, I think it's risky. And I think it's risky if it turns out that this virus is going to cause long-term harm. I mean, that to me is that unanswered question. It seems as if the virus, the mortality rate is very low, which is, thank God, right? And among kids, it's profoundly low. But I think what we've seen, at least on social media, some people are gravitating towards the mortality rate as the be-all. Well, it isn't necessarily the case. If this, first of all, it sounds like with some folks that get it, it's awful. That in and of itself is to be concerned. We don't want to see kids very sick. And secondly, if it causes lung or organ damage, that to me is a game changer in terms of how we look at the virus. And I do think there is some risk. And I think you're right. Your name is no longer there. It was Mary Ann, that private organizations are concerned about revenue and they have a different set of incentives. Habita, it's good to see you. Thank you for the question. College athletes are not employees, allegedly, and you're right. There are many who believe that they should be employees, but they're not as of now, and don't have the benefit of a union and to defend their rights. Do you think that now they feel more empowered to speak up regarding injustices in society and sports thanks to the current movement? And now we see that they're having much greater power, like the Mississippi state flag, removal of the Confederate portion of that flag. Will they start pushing for a union-like model where they don't violate NCAA rules and jeopardize their student-athlete status? Well, that's a great question, and it goes back to the name, image, and likeness issue, where the NCAA has signaled that they will allow eventually college athletes to negotiate their name, image, and likeness, but not through group licenses. And group licenses is an important feature because if they're allowed, then college athletes could form a trade association. A trade association is not a union, so this circumvents that are they employees, are they not employees question, where if they can collectivize as a trade association, they could still accomplish a lot of what they could under a union. Many would say it's not enough, it's not as good of a union, but it certainly would be a game changer. And if they could form a trade association to negotiate certain basic protections, now I think the time, as your question notes, when have we seen all of these elements come together? Social movements, the pandemic, college athletes speaking up in ways that they wouldn't before. I absolutely think that the rules will be different after all of this shakes out. And that doesn't mean that it's going to affect whether or not they're employees or not, but whether they can negotiate group licenses, maybe that will be part of federal legislation. We'll see. Let me go down here. Mark Eisenberg. I know Mark. Mark is a leader in sports and business. Can you talk more about waivers, college football programs? I mean, I would say it's the same set of issues where they vary by location, and it's an unsettled question. I would not rely on them to think that they're definitely going to work. Anonymous athlete, Tom Brady has taken some hits to his image, the anti-mask stance, and defending the rules to practice. I've defended him for many years, and this was the first time there was no defense for me. I took the shine off of him a bit. Are other players leaning in publicly about the debates on mask wearing and practicing? Yeah, it was interesting. So it's hard for his union to really go after Tom Brady, right? The NFLPA had some mild criticisms of Tom Brady, feeling as if he can work out. And I think he quoted FDR, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself." That's true. It's a great quote. But the difference here, of course, is that if it's an infectious virus, it's sort of, I mean, you might not be afraid, but you might take it with you and give it to someone else who is afraid. Let's see how it plays out. I mean, it's hard to sort of rein in Tom Brady of all people There's no one more influential in sports. And there's also no one who's done more for the Players Association than Tom Brady. Remember, he put his name on the case along with 12 other players, the lockout case back about 10 years ago. He took on the NFL with Deflategate, where because his union didn't negotiate protection for him and other players similarly situated, he ended up serving a 4-game suspension. So the union owes him a lot, and the NFL owes him a lot given what he's done marketability-wise. But his viewpoints are clearly not shared by some players. And as we get closer to the season, it'll be interesting to see if players, there's some division, public division about wearing masks and things like that. John Gump, I see a lot of schools announcing policies to return to campus, but I haven't seen any specify what threshold will be to decide students that need to be sent home and the semester concluded online. Do you think schools should have a standard? I think schools individually should enunciate a standard and figure out rules. And I think they are, and I think they're doing it in good faith. I would be cautious about schools getting together to all agree to one policy. As I mentioned earlier, state laws are very different, and a school would want to make sure that whatever they come up with, is compliant with the laws of the state that they're in. And the unique risks, let's face it, the virus is bad everywhere, but is less bad in some states than others. In some states, it's hard to imagine coming back. In other states where the communities took the virus maybe more seriously and where they wore masks and did things like that, it looks like the spread of the virus is not as bad. And here in New England, obviously, knock on wood, it looks like it's not as bad in New England based on infection rates, where they've gone down, unlike in some other states. And hopefully in other states, the same could be true. Do you think certain sports have a higher risk because of the nature of the game, or do you think they're all basically the same? Yeah, it's a great question. I'd have to think that basketball, where you're right on top of someone, breathing in the same air in an indoor facility, the risk is different than, say, golf or tennis, where obviously tennis, you don't really have to come into contact with the player. From what I've seen, the CDC is, initially there was some concern about the virus being spread by touching something and then touching your mouth. I think that can happen, but it sounds based, and I'm not a doctor or an epidemiologist, but it looks like the CDC has recalculated the risk and said that that's not so much the risk, or not as bad of a risk, as being next to someone who's got it and who isn't wearing a mask. So I do think the risk vary. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm just speaking as someone who has tried to, who knows sports a lot and has tried to read up on the science. It seems as if the risk is higher in sports where you're right on top of someone, indoor facility, less so outdoor facility where there's separation from the athlete. Maybe baseball isn't as risky, although baseball, you got a batter at home plate, there's the catcher there, there's the ump. But I'd have to think basketball, football, hockey, those sports where you're right on top of someone, in some cases in an indoor facility, the risk is probably higher. UNH football is supposed to compete at Kansas on September 5th. If UNH competes and soon after the athletes are hit, will UNH be faced with legal issues? Obviously, I can't speak for UNH. This is, I'm not representing the school in this forum, so I'm not going to answer questions about UNH individually. I would say schools that are reasonable in their approaches are going to be less vulnerable to litigation. And schools that factor in the science, schools that follow directives are going to be more insulated from liability than schools that are more aggressive to return. And I'm generalizing. My thought is that schools where college sports generate revenue more might be more risky. Southeastern Conference schools, for instance. I'm just generalizing, where they rely much more heavily on revenue than, say, colleges in the Northeast or colleges in other parts of the country where college sports don't generate the same revenue. So I can't answer the specific question. I can say, generally speaking, schools that utilize the science, take reasonable measures, are going to be a lot better off than schools that are too aggressive. can masks be mandated in sports? So mandating is really based on state-by-state law. We haven't seen the federal government attempt to mandate masks. And normally, public safety and health issues are under the jurisdiction of states. That's how the Constitution essentially sets it out. There's complexities to that, where the CDC has some authority, but I think those types of directives requiring that athletes wear masks would have to come state by state, most likely. And maybe it's a good idea, but maybe not, because that could affect breathing. And we didn't even talk about this. There are those with pre-existing conditions where they might be able to have potential legal remedies under the Americans with Disabilities Act, where asthma, for instance, can be a qualified disability. If you force someone to be in a workplace with asthma, with the pandemic, there could be liability. Also, age discrimination. Taking the NBA, where the league is looking into measures that could affect older coaches. Well, if I'm an older coach, and older isn't necessarily that old. Under federal law, older is 40 and up. That's the federal age protection law. It isn't 70, it's 40. And if you're in a category where the rules are different, if you can't go to the bench because the NBA says you're too old, that could present a potential age discrimination issue. So there's all sorts of legal possibilities with this. Alex Hall, if there's no FBS college football this fall, what effect do you see that having on the NCAA financial ecosystem? Well, it's going to partly depend on whatever the NCAA's insurance is, but no, there's no question about it that it would be disastrous for the NCAA and colleges, many colleges. Again, it varies by college, but colleges that are heavily reliant on sports, colleges that play in conferences where their budgets are predicated on massive influxes of revenue, to not have that revenue or have diminished revenue will absolutely affect the schools. It will make it harder to balance budgets. It will potentially affect other employees. It could make it more likely that there are furloughs, layoffs. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's certainly possible. We're a country that relies on sports and as a source of revenue generation. And that is very true in college sports at some schools. I don't want to make too broad of a stroke because it really varies by schools. Some schools lose money on sports. So, it really depends on which school we're talking about. Let's see. That was rapid fire. I hope that was helpful. And if I didn't get to your question, please ask it now. Here we go. Assuming the virus dissipates or a vaccine is found, how will sports look and feel differently in the years to come because of the pandemic? Yeah, what a great question, because let's play it out. Let's hope there's a vaccine. I think Dr. Fauci was saying by the end of the year or early next year, there's a good chance we'll get one. Let's pray and hope it happens, and we can distribute it so that people can afford it. I still think this is a game changer. I still think people are going to act differently after this pandemic, be it in sports, be it elsewhere, because there could be other viruses. People are going to be a lot more hesitant, I think, about going on a plane or going to an event where you're around someone, because with a vaccine, it might not always work. We know that vaccines don't always work. And whatever vaccine they come up with will be rushed. It won't have gone through the normal FDA evaluation process. So some might worry about long-term effects of using the vaccine. Let's hope we get the vaccine or better a cure, but there are going to be people that don't use it. There are going to be people who are skeptical about whether it's going to work for them. I don't think this is something that we can unwind. I don't think we're going to sort of hit the time machine and things are going to go back to February of 2020. I think this will have profound effects on how we live our lives going forward. Now, I don't think that means sports are going to go away, but there may be social distancing at games, and there will be a lot more people who are more cautious about going to sports and having their kids play. So we'll see how it plays out. But I absolutely think that we don't unwind things and we don't go back to the normal, that there will be a new normal that will hopefully be a lot better than the situation we're in now, but will be different. Hope I answered all of your questions. I hope this was helpful. Are there any other questions? want to make sure I get to everyone. Here we go. Devin Duddy. Devin, the law student. With many of the leagues changing their season lengths, how will this affect players with provisions in their contract that allow for bonuses? Great question. The leagues have not clarified that. And will they be calibrated? I think that there will be an effort to still permit bonuses, maybe discount them so that players can still earn them. But I think that's a level of detail that leagues still have to figure out. Habib again. What if there's a vaccine available? Do you see a scenario where it becomes mandatory for players to be vaccinated? So it could be. Yeah, I do think that's possible. I think a league could say that as a condition of employment, you have to take the vaccine. That would have to be collectively bargained because that is a working condition under labor law. Hours, wages, and other working conditions have to be bargained if there's a union in place. And the union would have to go along with it. Maybe some players will say, I don't want to do that, which would present an interesting issue where maybe they don't want to be tested, or rather they don't want a vaccine. I guarantee you some people are going to say, we don't know the long-term effects of this vaccine. They rushed it, right? We know that it's so easy to know that that's going to happen. And there has to be some percentage of athletes who take that viewpoint. Anyway, well, thank you all. I hope this was helpful. I hope I answered your questions. I tried to answer them as rapidly as possible, but my answer was incomplete. I'm sorry, but this was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you'll continue joining us for future sessions and future webinars. Keep an eye on our social media and our website, and just really appreciate the time, Mike.
You got it. Thank you all.
Take care.
Take care.